So firstly, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us for the third interview in our series of lunchtime sessions looking at employment rights after coronavirus. My name's Mary Towers and I'm an Employment Rights Policy Officer at the TUC. Today we're going to be considering the impact of coronavirus on platform workers and how this has exposed the regulatory reforms necessary to improve their working lives. And to explore this issue, I'm delighted to be hosting a conversation with Dr. Alessio Bertolini, a researcher at the University of Oxford's Internet Institute. Alessio has developed a wealth of insight into the world of platform work. He's currently working on the Oxford Internet Institute's Fair Work project, where he is investigating platform work in the UK and Germany. He's carried out extensive research into platform work over a number of years, having completed a PhD at the University of Edinburgh, which focused on comparative labour market regulations for non-standard workers, and contributed as a postdoctoral researcher to the University of Glasgow's project Work on Demand, Contracting for Work in a Changing Economy. In response to the coronavirus crisis, Alessio has written extensively about the impacts on platform workers and advocated changes to improve their working conditions. So on behalf of the TUC, I'd like to start by extending a big thank you to Alessio for sharing his time and expertise with us today. In terms of what we'd like those joining us today to gain from this session, we hope that you'll come away with an insight into the particular challenges facing platform workers in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, the problems this has exposed with the platform business model, and some ideas for reform. So, Alessio, could you start by perhaps giving us some examples of how the coronavirus crisis has exposed the way in which precarious employment can have a negative impact on the health and safety of workers?
Well, I think first of all, what I would like to say is actually that the platform economy, rather than being just a marginal or just a new activity at the margin of the normal economy or the more traditional economy, the coronavirus crisis has shown how these workers provide actually fundamental services. So in a time of lockdown where people are self-isolated or in quarantine, many platform workers can actually allow us to stay safely at home and receive goods and services that otherwise we wouldn't be able to purchase. And however, whilst we can stay safely at our home, and for a lot of gig economy workers or platform workers, this is rather a luxury. And it is a luxury because many of them don't have the financial means to actually not work, to decide not to work. And when they perform their work, they are a risk for their health and sometimes even for their life, and with very limited protection. Many of these workers work without health and safety equipment, without PPE. And even when they do, they are still performing activities that are quite hazardous when it comes to health and safety, and they're a high risk of contagion. And moreover, many of these workers they cannot afford to decide not to work, sometimes even if they have contracted the virus. And the reason is that many of these workers are classified as independent contractors by these companies, and therefore they have access to very limited social protection, for example, sickness pay or other forms of financial support. And therefore they feel obliged to work in order not to lose income.
Yeah. So this is obviously a really worrying state of affairs for platform workers, and I wonder if have the platform companies taken any steps to help platform workers in the coronavirus crisis, and if they have done, then do you think that these steps bode well for the future of platform work?
Yeah, well, as a Fair Work, we have been analyzing the policy response that has been done by over 120 platforms in over 23 countries in the world. So we have quite of a global view of what has happened in the world of the gig economy with the coronavirus crisis. And what we found is by far the most common response by the platforms is the introduction of so-called contact-free delivery. And although you might think that this is a very good thing because it protects at the same time both the client receiving, for example, the parcel or the delivery and the worker, I would actually say that this is rather a measure to protect more the customers of these platforms rather than the workers. And the reason is that whilst the workers is protected at the moment of the delivery, is not protected throughout the supply chain, because the workers, before they deliver the parcel, they have to go, for example, to a warehouse to collect the parcel, or they need to go to a restaurant to collect the food delivery, report to I don't know, like a fast food or any form of kind of catering service, and they're not protected throughout all their work. So of course, this protection is only quite partial, to say the least. And another very relatively common response is the introduction of masks and other health and safety equipment, so PPE, for the workers. And of course, this is a very good measure. However, there have been some problems in the UK, but also in many other countries, of the fact that many of these companies actually promised this PPE, but they have actually not delivered it. Or in the case where companies were saying that they were going to refund the workers for the purchase of these, for example, disinfectants of masks, the money has never come. So the workers have found themselves to pay out of their own pocket for their own protection whilst performing gig tasks. And another, which I think is a more radical change in the policies of these platforms, have been the introduction of some form of sick pay or financial support for workers who have contracted coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, in the UK, Uber Eats and Deliveroo have introduced this sort of emergency funds. And although, of course, this is a very important policy, what we have found is actually in many cases, the amount of money received by the workers is not enough to live on. And there have been some estimates that it roughly measures about 1/3 of what the workers working full-time would be earning if they were to work. So of course, this financial support, although of course this is quite laudable, is a good measure, is definitely not enough to protect the workers adequately.
Yeah, yeah. So there's obviously a lot more that needs to be done to improve conditions for platform workers. I'd sort of add that clearly the fragmentation of the classic employment model has had some extremely worrying effects on people's lives and well-being, seen through the prism of the coronavirus crisis. So with this in mind, could we perhaps explore a bit further what you think some of the flaws in the platform business model are, and how
I
the
think
coronavirus
that,
revealed those?
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, by far the most important issue is the misclassification of workers. So many of these workers, of course, not all of them. In some cases, these workers are genuinely self-employed and independent contractors. But in many other cases, and we've seen quite a few court cases in the UK involving platform work and the misclassification of these workers. And many of these workers are unfortunately classified as independent contractors, although the work they perform is much more similar to that of an employee or that of a dependent worker. And by being classified as independent contractors in many countries, including the UK, that means that you have many fewer employment rights and much less access to adequate social protections. And what we have seen in this crisis in the UK, but also abroad, is the fact that many companies have started to behave more like employers. So they have provided, for example, PPE, as I was mentioning before, but they've also started providing some form of sick pay or some form of financial support for the workers who are unable to work. So, of course, the overall narrative that has been quite dominant in the platform economy to these days, which is the fact that these companies are just tech companies. Uber never declares to be a transport company, has always said, even in the court, that they are a tech company. And this narrative that these companies are just matching supply and demand in a certain sector and offering the services through an app for a self-employed workforce is, of course, no longer tenable given the measures that have started implementing during the crisis.
Yeah, yeah. So looking ahead to the future of platform work beyond the current coronavirus crisis, could you perhaps tell us a bit more about the Fair Work project and some of the ideas that you have for the reform of platform work?
Yeah, with Fair Work, we've started last year to investigate in the working conditions offered by platforms in different countries. And we've started with India and South Africa, and this year we've been expanding to many more countries. And in Europe, we just finished our report on Germany. We're now starting our research in the UK. And we are rating and ranking platforms in each country based on our 5 fair work principles that I'm going to mention in a second. And we assign always a basic point for a basic principle satisfied, and we assign an additional point if there is a more advanced achievement in terms of fair work principles. And what we are advocating, I'll basically just follow the 5 principles, which I think they're quite encompassing and exhaustive. And first of all, we argue for fair pay. So we want all workers to be paid at least the minimum wage, and even after considering work-related costs. So by work-related costs, I mean if a delivery rider has to repair the bike, that this cost of repairing the bike are included. If you are working for a ride-hailing company like Uber or Ola, the cost of the fuel, for instance, is considered into your pay. And the second principle is that of fair conditions. So we want workers to have adequate health and safety protections. We want the companies to protect the workers fully, even by providing accident insurance or financial support in the case, for example, of the coronavirus, in which they prove to be unable to work. And we want fair contracts. So we want the contracts to adequately reflect the real nature of the relationship. So we don't want workers to be wrongly classified as independent contractors if the working relationship closely resembles that of an employee over a dependent worker. We want fair management. So we want that to be due process for any decisions affecting the worker. For example, we don't want arbitrary deactivations. We don't want any form of decision reducing the number of hours worked or the amount of work given to a worker just arbitrarily by the company. And finally, we want fair representation. So we want that workers have a collective voice, and this voice to be taken into account in any management decision done by the company.
Alessio, thanks so much. It's really great to hear about that work, and thank you for the fascinating insight that you've given us into platform work and the difficulties that platform workers are facing during the coronavirus crisis. And we've really appreciated the insight into the Fair Work project and the ideas that you have for reform in this area of work. Unfortunately, now I've got to bring our conversation to a close. We'd both like to say thank you to everyone who's joined us for this lunchtime seminar, and with that, I'll bring it to a close. Thank you very much.